Yes, the EU election is now just 5 days away, and our Europe editor Armin Georgian is with me. Armin, what are you focusing on today?
Hi, Nadia. Well, migration is a big election issue, especially in the so-called frontline states, which are not only the coastal countries in southern Europe, but also some of the landlocked ones in the east, such as Poland. And in Poland, officials say that the number of attempted illegal border crossings from Belarus has shot up. Humanitarian activists there are stepping in to try to help migrants.
Monitoring the situation, we are documenting. We are trying to tell people on the move what their situation is as best as we can. But our abilities to act are very limited. There isn't much that we can do.
The Polish Prime Minister claims that Belarus and Russia are using migrants as a tool of hybrid war against Poland. Here's Donald Tusk.
We're not dealing with any asylum seekers here. We're dealing with a coordinated, very careful operation on many levels to break the Polish border and try to destabilize the country.
Well, the opposition Law and Justice Party, led by Jarosław Kaczynski, which lost power last year, is talking tough on migration in this election campaign and accusing Tusk's party of lying about the new EU asylum mechanism and what it really means for Poland, Tusk rejecting that accusation. Well, Donald Tusk's Civic Platform is neck and neck with Law and Justice in the opinion polls, 34 to 33% there. The far-right Confederation Party currently placed third with 12%, and then the centrist and left-wing groupings trailing behind. So it looks like quite a nail-biter there, Nadia.
Indeed, and clearly migration is going to be one of the big issues in the next EU Parliament. Not the only issue, though. With a look at what those priorities are likely to be, here's France 24's Luke Brown and Aurore Dupuis.
Will the next 5-year term be greener? Over the coming 5 years, MEPs will vote on hundreds of bills. Many of the new laws will focus on the environment and the Green Deal, one of the top priorities for the European Parliament over the past 5 years, and which has recently faced calls for a rethink during the farmers' protests. Another major issue in the inbox, the European Union budget. The current long-term budget, the multi-annual financial framework, runs its course in 2027. The EU will need to find new sources of funding to pay for the green transition, the levelling up policies and the EU's common policies. Faced with the uncertainty over the US elections and the spike in conflicts on Europe's doorstep, the issue of security and defence will need addressing. If NATO were to be weakened by the US pulling away, for example, then the EU would need to reinforce its strategic autonomy. Meanwhile, the Migration and Asylum Pact was approved by Parliament a few months ago. MEPs will have to get down to work to ensure it can come into force from 2026. European states will have to accommodate refugees as well as potentially continue to sign partnerships with third countries to reduce migrant flows into the EU. Finally, the EU's enlargement process has returned once more to the fore in the wake of the war in Ukraine. Indeed, the EU decided to open negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova and grant candidate status to Georgia in December. That means there are now 9 countries officially in the waiting room to join the EU. So, will the next 5 years see the EU grow to more than 27 members?
And we're joined now by Luke Brown, who helped to compile that report. He's here for our Everyday Europe segment. Luke, welcome. And you had glitter on a few days ago. Now you're here with a hairdryer. So what's all this about today?
This is another result of the European Green Deal. Of course, we've been talking about that in recent days. The requirement to reduce wastage, encourage a circular economy, aim for carbon neutral EU by 2050. Now, this year, one of the most recent measures is to adopt the Right to Repair Directive, making it easier and cheaper to repair certain household goods rather than simply buying new ones. There is a couple of elements of this. There's a 2-year, on top of the 2-year mandatory warranty, manufacturers have to be able to produce the possibility to repair certain products for consumers. Those include your typical smartphone, but also washing machines as well as vacuum cleaners. That will then prolong one by one further year the warranty. Also aiming to, at the other end of the market, to boost the repair market itself. The new rules impose a reasonable price on repairs. That means that they're going to avoid intentional deterrence, which means often quite a lot of consumers say, well, it's actually going to be cheaper for me to buy a new object rather than to repair it. They're going to ban that. There are also going to have to be a guarantee to provide the availability of spare parts so third-party repair services can realistically function. There's one other key issue in the new law is that smartphone makers will be banned from using software to obstruct repairs. Companies such as Apple, for example, have faced criticism from the EU lawmakers that their policy of linking software to new batteries and so forth has prevented third-party shops from being able to repair them, so that is in future going to be banned.
So all of this obviously is related to the Green Deal and trying to reduce waste overall, isn't it?
Yes, reducing wastage and cost. The European Commission said 35 million tonnes of waste and 260 million tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions are generated each year due to still usable consumer goods being thrown away. Over the next 15 years, the EU estimates that the cost for consumers of replacing what is essentially repairable wares is 176 billion euros, so a gigantic sum of money over that period for consumers. Now, these latest measures, they actually build on the EU's eco-design rules against planned obsolescence. For example, since 2021, manufacturers must provide and propose spare parts for things such as the hairdryer that I've got here, but also TV screens so that they can be repairable for up to 10 years after manufacture. And earlier this year, it was also ruled that smartphones, again, back to the smartphone, must have replaceable batteries, so once again, reducing waste.
Luke Brown, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's take you on the programme now to Ireland, where housing has been a huge issue in the election campaign, especially for young people. France 24's Clovis Casali has this report for us.
Niamh moved back to her family home during COVID, and now the 28-year-old can't afford to leave.
I would like to maybe move in with my partner or like do something like that, and that's just not an option really. There's different decisions of life being put off or kind of taken into consideration about how that would work because your house is your base.
In Ireland, 2/3 of under 30-year-olds still live with their parents. Niamh works in education and is considering emigrating to another European country like some of her friends. She expects more from politicians running in the coming elections.
It's easy to say, like, I'm going to move and get something better somewhere else. Staying is harder.
Her home is in Enfield, a small town 40 kilometres outside of Dublin. The fields where Niamh used to play growing up have been replaced by houses. The area is attracting more and more commuters, with property prices soaring in recent years. The housing crisis hits both rural Ireland and cities, so all political parties have been campaigning on the issue, saying more construction and flats were desperately needed. Fianna Fáil, currently in power here and part of the Renew bloc, is now calling for a new European strategy, with the creation of a committee paving the way for more reforms and investment. The Irish will be electing 14 MEPs at the European Parliament. One candidate, Rory Hearn, is calling for ambitious policies. Hearn is a university professor specialised in housing issues. He suggested we meet at a brand new development in Maynooth, outside Dublin. It was partly financed by foreign funds. Nothing's for sale here.
And they're renting them for astronomical rents, like 1,900 for a two-bedroom apartment. And it's a good example of what's happened to housing in Ireland. We've seen really huge numbers of evictions. Last year, we had 15,000 households evicted across the country, not for doing anything wrong, but because their landlord wanted to get in tenants who would pay higher rents.
He's standing in the EU elections for the Social Democrats, a small party in Ireland. He firmly believes the European Central Bank could help more.
The interest rates, they affect both people trying to take out mortgages, but also then people trying to lend to build. At these really high interest rates, that means it's a higher cost of financing, which means a higher cost of housing.
A housing commission set up by the government has called for a radical strategic reset. It says there's a deficit of over 250,000 homes in Ireland. First-time buyers are struggling to enter the market, and affordable housing must be a priority.
Clovis Casali reporting for us there. And that's it for Europe Votes today. My thanks to Armin George and Luke Brown, both of them back with me here in the studio tomorrow.